This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. From doctor's appointment check-ins to work meetings held over Zoom, so much of our daily lives now happens online. For many of us, it's second nature. Simply tap a phone here, click a link there. But what happens when you don't have the skills or even the devices needed to navigate it all? That's called the digital divide, and it's getting wider. This hour, we're looking into how cuts to the Digital Equity Act by the Trump administration are affecting efforts to close that gap in Connecticut and across the country. Joining me now, PR Lockhart, who's the economic development reporter for Connecticut Mirror. PR, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or if you would like to share your own experiences, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So PR, I've mentioned the phrase digital equity. Can you tell us what exactly that is?
Yeah, it can get called a couple different things. I've seen digital equity, I've seen digital literacy, I've seen digital opportunity. But all three basically are this idea of having the skills and the ability to actually use technological devices. So let's say you have an iPad. Digital literacy, or digital equity in this case, is what you actually need to know how to use that iPad. So you're able to cut it on, you're able to use the apps, you're able to get to the website you want to get to, you're able to cut on your webcam. You can just use the whole thing. That's really what digital equity is. And what we've found in the past, several years since the pandemic is not everyone actually has, the skills to be able to use these devices. Mm-hmm. So when we're also talking about digital equity, we're not just talking about skills, we're talking about the people who actually have those skills and the people who don't, and kind of how you get more of the people who don't have the skills able to actually use the devices they need for their day-to-day lives.
And I was definitely reporting on a lot of that as a reporter at the time, especially right before lockdown, going into lockdown and coming out of lockdown. Mm-hmm. And it was definitely the time where it was spotlighted, right? That not everyone has the opportunity or the financial abilities to either acquire those skills or have these devices, as we mentioned. And in your reporting, you found that state research shows roughly 73% of people here in Connecticut have access to internet-capable devices, but only 64% have the skills needed to use those devices. So what are some of the everyday tasks that a lack of digital know-how can really prevent a person from doing?
Yeah. So this kind of runs the gamut, honestly. Mm-hmm. So if you are a student in grade school, let's say, a lack of, digital equity could really mean that you don't necessarily have the ability to get on the internet at home, do your homework. You're not going to be able to write papers, things like that. If you're a bit older, one of the women I spoke with for my story, she basically said she went to a library to get help in East Hartford. And she was like, I didn't know how to use my online banking. Mm-hmm. And I kept calling my bank and I kept going in trying to get help. And they're like, oh, you need to go online to do this. So, online banking. If you have medical care that offers telehealth, where you're able to kind of, zoom in with your doctor and talk to them, a lack of digital equity or digital knowledge could really mean that you're not able to do that appointment, and you're going to have to find time to get into your office in front of your doctor, which might delay your care. So there's a lot of different ways that, just not being able to get online and immediately do what you need to do can kind of affect people in ways that we're not always thinking about if we do have the ability to kind of do this stuff on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And even with this being so prevalent, I find myself moments where you can download an app for the thing. Or I recently had experience where you have to have the app in order to do the next thing. And so I think it's easy to forget a time where that was not the case, right? So, which is why this conversation is so important, is to not forget that not everyone have those skills or those devices. And generally speaking, which groups of people across the state don't have all the skills and the training they need to use their devices for daily life?
Yeah. So, some of this starts getting kind of close to the actual policies that we're going to probably talk about a little bit later, because those policies set out specific groups.
Right.
And those groups overlap with the same groups that need, help with these digital equity, digital literacy skills in Connecticut. But to get specific, when we're talking about groups, we're talking about, senior citizens, so people kind of over the age of 60. We are talking about incarcerated populations. We're talking about people with disabilities that may affect their ability to, use a conventional computer or use one that hasn't had, visual or, keyboard modifications for them to be able to use them. We are talking about people with general literacy issues. There are some people who, just have literacy difficulties already that, technological literacy compounds. We are talking about racial and ethnic minorities. There have been, a lot of different studies that look at different minority groups, both, we're talking about racial because that's what the policy outlines, but also economic, where they just can't afford necessarily either the devices or consistent access to some of the things that get you online. And then, the really big one that I think people often overlook when we talk about this is rural populations. And rural populations, they get defined as anyone living within a certain distance away from a town that has like 50,000 people. So, I used to work in West Virginia as an economics reporter. And in West Virginia, there's actually only like a couple of towns that have 50,000 people or more. So we actually found when I was doing my broadband reporting there that like 97% of West Virginia counts as a rural population and therefore gets like benefits from the Digital Equity Act, which is, the federal policy that kind of addresses all of the things that we're kind of talking about right now. So there's a lot of people that are in need. And I think in a state like Connecticut, where 92% of people have broadband, we kind of overlook that just having an internet connection isn't enough. You need to have more than that.
Yeah, it's so interesting having this conversation today because as you're mentioning the populations, I used to cover a city that's 40,000 people. And this was, I want to say 10, 12, 13 years ago. And the conversation at that time was trying to bring in the broadband, the faster broadband into the city. So the Wi-Fi infrastructure was not really a thing quite yet. And I imagine they're probably still having a similar discussion still 10 years later just because of the nature of the city, and we're gonna talk more locally here because we'll hear from people at the Hartford Public Library later in this show. But you mentioned public policy, and as we'll hear, the Trump administration recently cut funding for something called the Digital Equity Act. First of all, can you tell us what is this act and how long has it been around?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, as we've already discussed, there's really this period where the whole world gets forced online, and people all of a sudden, you're going into your office, now you have to go into your Zoom meeting. You're going into your classroom, now you have to, log onto your Blackboard or whatever your online, education portal is and do your homework that way. And as that's happening, the Biden administration, they have this, big infrastructure package they're trying to get passed. And because they're seeing so much of this like online disparity happen with who's able to use the internet, we also see the Biden administration as a part of that bigger package pass this thing called the Digital Equity Act. So what the Digital Equity Act does is it gives $2.75, basically $3 billion to states across the country. Every state is eligible. And they basically just have to create plans saying this is how we want to create, digital equity. Here are the programs. Here are the, funding mechanisms. Here are the different things we want to do to ensure that we have more people not only being able to access the internet, but being able to actually use it and take advantage of it to its fullest. So the money was given for states to start coming out with plans. But what we see happen is because of the cuts in the past couple of months, they weren't actually given the money to implement. So every state came up with a plan. Connecticut has a plan. It's like 300 pages. You can still find it online. But it was never able to actually implement any of that plan.
And I know the act is also connected to something called BEAD, which stands for Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so BEAD is, as you actually raised earlier, there's kind of this distinction when we talk about broadband where you have kind of the wires and the connections of it all. And then you have the skill building to actually take advantage of the internet once you access it. BEAD actually helps with the first part. It helps with the connections. It's basically giving, almost $43 billion to states to improve their broadband connections and ensure that internet is more available. So, you really think of BEAD and the Digital Equity Act as kind of companion pieces to one another. One gives everyone the connections, the other gives everyone the skills. And together, they're supposed to, be the biggest investment in, internet access in the country, basically ever.
Well, and I feel like this is an obvious question, or with an obvious answer based on what you just mentioned. But does the loss of the act prevent BEAD from having that biggest impact?
Yes, it's a part of a couple of different changes to BEAD that we're kind of seeing. I think the Digital Equity Act, the loss really, it really hurts the people who need this the most. Like, those are the people who were targeted under this, and without all of this money, there's kind of this question of how do you help them? Like, states, there are a lot of states who are very well intentioned, but I don't necessarily think that Connecticut just has, $20 million laying around that it can now, put towards this. And that's around how much the state was going to get in money from the federal government. So, I think it's a loss of money that it's going to be really hard for states to replace.
When you were doing your reporting, do we know why President Trump cut the funding for digital equity? Was there any explanation why?
Yeah, so this happens back in May. This is where we first kind of see this funding get affected. And what basically happens is the president takes to social media and he says that he views the Digital Equity Act as unconstitutional. He also calls it racist and illegal, in part because the law does note that one of the covered populations is racial and ethnic minorities. Now, again, that's just one of the populations. There are a lot more populations affected. And, as we've already discussed, the biggest population affected is rural populations. And from what we know about kind of just demographics, we know that rural populations aren't predominantly racial minorities. So, the president's reasoning for cutting this act is kind of going to affect a lot more than kind of where he focused. But right now, what the administration is doing is they're kind of arguing that they have the ability to cut, funding to federal programs that no longer align with their priorities. And as a result, this is kind of just what's happening with the funding. So states got told in May that they were no longer going to receive the funding for the program and that it had been terminated. There are efforts to restore the funding, kind of being led by some national organizations. But as of now, it's kind of all on pause.
Yeah, and with those efforts too, are you hearing from local legislators about this? How are they responding to this? Because this is not really a new conversation we're having, even though it's a very specific funding and an act that we're talking about. But as we mentioned earlier, that this has been the topic since, I want to say, during lockdown, post-lockdown, since we sort of had this collective realization that there is this inequity in the digital space. So are you hearing anything from local lawmakers about this?
Yeah. So, there's some state-level kind of conversations happening right now. The Attorney General actually joined a multi-state lawsuit back in June. That's going to kind of challenge, the broader argument the federal administration's been making. They kind of challenge, the idea that the administration can just cut funding for whatever it doesn't want anymore. They say Congress appropriated the money, therefore, it should be spent. So that's one thing that's happening, and that's happening from Attorney General Tong. As well, we're also seeing Senator Blumenthal do a whole lot. He had a press conference in June where he held that in East Hartford, where he had people from different library organizations, as well as Capital Workforce Partner and some other groups, and they were talking about the importance of restoring the funding. In addition to doing that, Senator Blumenthal has actually signed on to a letter that was sent to the federal agency that oversees both BEAD and the Digital Equity Act. And he was basically calling for BEAD to be restored because there have been some changes to BEAD as well that are going to make it less effective. So, there are some different efforts kind of going on to both get the funding restored, but also kind of just ensure that the federal government remains focused on the broader goal of, internet for all, which is kind of how the Biden administration phrases these acts when they first kind of come out in 2021.
Well, then we've been talking a lot about policy and how it impacts, the people, us, the people. What are you hearing from people as you're reporting for your stories? What are some of the needs that they're sharing with you that this is a very important skill slash I don't want to say product, but devices to have?
Yeah. So, I won't step on the Hartford Public Library's toes too much because I know they're definitely going to come in and say a lot of those things.
Absolutely.
But, some of the stuff I've been hearing is just from different libraries, just, we were going to use this money to help teach people. And, now we don't have the money to be able to do that. So kind of we have to figure out how we can still teach people. The United Way of Connecticut was going to expand its 211 resource hotline with some resources that focus exclusively on digital, knowledge. They're going to have to figure out how they fund that sort of, build out now without this money. Capital Workforce Partners was going to do some workforce development work and kind of, help people gain the skills, be able to apply to jobs, work on their resumes, do online orientations, things like that. And, they were going to actually get, I want to say almost $12 million to do that. So now they have to kind of address that. So, I think that the real issue that I hope my reporting outlined was there is still a need. That money going away doesn't erase the level of need that we see in this state. Even if there are worse states where there's even more need, Connecticut does have a need. And now, in the absence of that money, people have to kind of figure out workarounds. Right. And, there's definitely commitment to finding them, but it is tough. It is tough.
Well, and then we're definitely going to get into that need throughout the conversation this hour. And PR, before we let you go, what are you following next? How might this decision sort of trickled into the Connecticut's workforce development? Yeah,
that is something that I'm still in the very, very early phases of looking into. I think there's honestly a whole lot of different federal impacts I'm still trying to, figure out. I'm also very new to Connecticut. I've been reporting here for about a month. But yeah, as far as workforce development, I'm really interested, honestly, to ask those questions of the people with the lived experience. How is this going to affect you? What are the programs that, digital knowledge is really needed to be able to do? Are there particular jobs in industries that maybe get affected? As we're thinking about these economic disparities in the state, and we're trying to ensure that more people have access to, jobs that ensure a good quality of life, I feel like the impacts of this will probably be on training. It'll probably be on skill building. And, that's going to affect the people who already need help the most. And I'm curious to see what that looks like and kind of how organizations are navigating that. But that's definitely still very early. My editor's probably like, dude, you haven't even pitched this to me as a story yet. Why are you talking about this?
Now you've pitched it. It's official now. And we're going to have to come back to you and get a follow-up on that because we too will be following this very closely. So thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us and telling us why this matters. PR Lockhart, who's the economic development reporter for the Connecticut Mirror. Thank you so much, PR, for your time.
Of course. Thank you.
After the break, we're joined by leaders of the Hartford Public Library, and we'll hear how they're responding to the clawback of digital equity funds. Join the conversation. Let us know if you have any questions, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. As more and more of the world goes digital, not everyone is keeping pace. For many, gaining the skills to learn technology requires a little bit of practice and training. And that's something the Hartford Public Library was offering to its residents. But President Trump's recent cuts to something called the Digital Equity Act threatens their ability to do that. Joining me now, Bridget Quinn, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer for Hartford Public Library. Bridget, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And also with the Hartford Public Library is Bonnie Soberg, who is the Director of Public Services. Bonnie, thank you so much for being with us as well.
Yeah, again, we're glad to be here.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or you want to share your experiences with us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Bridget, earlier this year, Hartford Public Library was celebrating. And we know the celebrations quickly faded because we'll dig into this throughout the conversation. But what kind of doors and possibilities were opening for the library in terms of the digital literacy offerings?
Yeah, well, public libraries and certainly the Harvard Public Library have been kind of raising the issue of digital literacy and the digital divide, honestly, since the 90s when, the World Wide Web first appeared. And public libraries are all about access, right? Ensuring that people have the ability, regardless of either what they have at home or their economic background, have the opportunity to participate in society and avail themselves of knowledge and resources. So, ever since the dawn of the internet and devices, and as that's kind of just grown over the years, public libraries have really been at the forefront of ensuring that people can understand what they can do and have access. So I feel like, the library has been looking to grow programs that help enhance digital literacy literally for decades. But, to your point in the introduction, too, in our first segment, is that since the pandemic, it really became much more apparent as how critical it was for people to have those skills in order to participate as a contributing member of society, and also be able to gain the skills that they need to be successful, whether it's for health or work or education. So we had been really aggressively pursuing opportunities along with many partners in the state to provide even more resources and accessibility for people to help close that divide and to enhance opportunities for more digital literacy. So we were on tap to have a really large infusion of funding to greatly expand opportunities, as well as we had funding in hand and had started it. So, and I think Bonnie will be able to give a lot more details about that. But yeah, we were really feeling excited and on the cusp of being able to do something transformative.
Well, and so what happened after that? And I think you received a notice actually that the funding was not going to come through after all.
Exactly. So the large program that we were participating in was with Capital Workforce Partners, who I think, as PR had mentioned in the first segment, was on tap to receive almost $12 million. And the Harvard Public Library, was set to receive 2.5 of that, a very big chunk to create the kind of public-facing service and digital navigation and digital literacy services. We were notified that we got the award, but we never, actually signed a contract for that. However, we had also received other funding through the state to provide digital navigation and digital navigator services, and we had signed a contract. We had received, notifications. We were well on the way of providing that, and everything just abruptly came to a stop.
Well, and as it stands now, what happened to the people that you hired as digital navigators and leaders of the initiative?
Well, unfortunately, we couldn't continue to keep them on the program. So these funding cuts have really dramatic and kind of, real life consequences for people, right? They thought that they were going to be employed and helping to do these services. And it wasn't just the people that we employed, but it was also the people that had already started receiving the services. Right. All of a sudden you have to tell them, sorry, we can't continue.
Well, then you mentioned real life, and we heard from PR Lockhart, who's the economic development reporter at CT Mirror earlier, talking about the real need. It's not a situation that's unique to Connecticut, but certainly there's a huge need here in our state. And Bonnie, as we heard earlier too, we know that not everyone in the state has the skills that they need to use digital devices for those everyday tasks. So what does the Hartford Public Library offer to these folks to help them with that?
As Bridget mentioned, the library's been about this for a long time, and we continue to be about it. I remember when things shut down for COVID and we first opened up, we had people waiting in line outside the library to get in to use the computers because, everything had to be accessed digitally. So we've been cognizant of this need and on it. I don't think a day goes by that our public service staff isn't assisting someone on the computer with either accessing a website or finding a form online. Mm-hmm. But there is a limitation to what they can do. From the circulation desk, they're helping people. But what we hoped for with the digital equity program was doing classes, doing a lot more one-on-one, having people available to sit down for an extended period of time. And it's kind of give a man a fish versus teaching them a fish scenario.
Right.
But we do offer, every one of our branches has everyday tech that's offered by the branch managers. Some are weekly, some are bi-monthly, some are monthly. We also, our downtown library offers computer classes twice monthly. They're very basic. They're on Thursdays. People can reach out to the library for information about that, so that's being offered. And actually, some of the laptops that were purchased for the Digital Equity Grant are being used in that program. We want them to be used for digital equity and digital skills. And then also our American Place has the IT program where it's IT training, and those interns, they just finished up a round of internships where they were out in the libraries offering tech help to anyone who needed it.
Well, I know you mentioned, especially during the pandemic, there was a lot of need for those services. Are you still seeing those information sessions or training for that digital literacy skills? Are they still in high demand?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, a day does not go by that someone's not in the library. Actually, I worked Saturday, and we had enough staff that I sat with a woman for about an hour because she just really needed help, and she was an older adult who needed to take care of something online and just really didn't have the capacity or skills. She had the capacity, she just never had been shown how.
Right.
So we sat for a time and taught her how to do it, went over it. But every day there are people in the library asking for help for something online, some kind of digital skill.
Well, and actually with the example that you just shared, help us understand more who attends these sessions or who asks for those one-on-one services. And do they walk away feeling more confident in their skills or being able to accomplish what they came in to do?
Yeah, so it's a variety because we, like that training I talked about, that's mainly young adults. But we have people of all ages. So predominantly, we do have quite a few of our older adults who maybe, I look back, I'm 62. I didn't have computer in high school.
Right. I mean, there's so much teaching of ourselves.
I was not around. So we have older adults who maybe haven't, through whatever their job life was, didn't gain those digital skills, and now they have things they have to do online.
Right.
And they don't have those skills. So we do get a lot of older adults that need assistance. And really, yes and no to your second question. So it depends on the time we have. Sometimes we can get them to a website, and say, here's where you need to be. This is what you need to put in here. This is what you need to put in here. But the everyday tech or even the digital navigators, the time to be able to sit down and teach people how to do it takes it to another level. So yes, I think the vast majority of the time people leave the library feeling like they've been helped. And then there's those times where they have extra help where they go feeling even like they've gained new skills.
Well, and Bridget, with that in mind too, so many people, and actually as you're both sort of sharing your experiences with me, I'm picturing local libraries. Like every time I go to one, the computers are always being used, and I do reflect now thinking about it, it's like it is all ages, and whether or not they're using it to print something or to do their homework or even to play video games. Certainly the services are, I think, above and beyond what people normally think what they provide, right? And I think with that in mind too, talking about with what the funding situation is as we speak, what happens next? What are the library's plans for how to move forward? Can you move forward, and what are some of the hurdles that you're seeing in your way?
Well, I wish I could say that we have all sorts of other funding lined up to be able to backfill this and to meet the need, but we don't. Without this funding, we won't be able to expand services or provide the appropriate level of services for the demand. So we will go on, offering what we can, but there will be many people that will either have to turn away or don't get to realize, a full enhanced skill set because we just don't have the capacity to do that. So, we're resilient. We'll keep looking, but it will have an impact. And I think when you think about, it's not just a nice thing anymore, right? Like we've talked about that. It's people who can't access my chart, and that has a real world kind of health outcome impact, or that aren't comfortable or don't have the knowledge to apply for a job. I mean, what job now do you actually fill out a paper application? You don't. It is all online, and usually the whole interview process is online. So people really need those skills. Social services, any kind of public assistance. Those are the kinds of things, and that's, those are real kind of day-to-day things, but there's also the social impact of it, right? I mean, a grandparent or an older adult, social isolation is like a huge health risk. And so you want people to feel connected. Part of what was really wonderful about this Digital Navigator program, too, is connecting people. It's like a person-to-person relationship so that, it doesn't feel so isolating being online and they're learning a skill, but they're also, having a social interaction. So there's so many different levels of this, and without this funding, unfortunately, it just sets us back quite a bit and doesn't let us enhance the skill set of our community. Employers are also, being impacted by this because a trained workforce, a trained community makes for a better employee if they already come to an employer with a certain skill set or they're ready to be trained. So this is going to have a domino effect across us for economic development, for school readiness, for school success, and it really hits on kind of all points of existence here.
Well, and I think a really big point that all of you have made so far is I think using the internet used to be a luxury, but it is certainly ingrained in our daily lives. And it's not like you mentioned, it's not just for entertainment, it's for health, it's for job searching. So I don't know how to emphasize how important those things. I mean, as you have already here, in terms of being able to navigate or have those devices available. And so Bonnie, as you're sort of navigating this too, are you speaking with other libraries? What have you heard from them? Are they worried about their abilities to meet the needs of residents?
The Connecticut State Library monthly hosts a group called Connecticut Libraries and Partners for Digital Equity. So there's conversation monthly around it. I think to Bridget's point earlier, we all have been about the business of digital equity for quite some time.
Right.
So I don't know if I'd use the word worried or concerned, just looking to pivot, looking to figure out, because we won't just turn our back on it. We can't. It's not as easy to say, "Oh, can't do that." Right. So let's think of something else we can do. The need is there. The need is not going to go away. And so just looking, I think librarians are resilient, creative people, and they are going to keep trying to find new ways to either get funding or be creative with what they're doing. But again, it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to compensate for what has been lost. We will just keep up the effort at the level at which we're able to do.
Well, and Bridget, this is unfortunately not the first hit the library has taken this year, right? How have some of these sort of unexpected federal funding cuts impacted the work that you do overall?
Yeah, well, over the last 6 months, we've had the impact of losing $500,000 of funding for critical sources. Now, some of that has been restored. It's been a roller coaster, and that kind of that kind of dynamic really is a challenge because you think about staffing and you think about programming and planning. The largest cut that we've received and that has been sustained is the funding that we received from USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. We receive about $250,000 a year to help people navigate the citizenship process. Now, these are people that are in our country legally. They are permanent residents that are looking to become American citizens. We've been doing this work for over 15 years and receiving funding from the federal government to assist with that process. That was cut, and so that means that we're not able to help those people. And just in our state alone, there's 26,000 people that are eligible. So that was a huge funding cut. And we also received notice of the cancellation of a contract that we had through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. That thankfully was restored. So we've been doing financial literacy and and access to kind of banking resources for people that don't have those skills. And again, that is also impacted by digital literacy. So, it's been a real roller coaster for us to be able to kind of navigate through these last few months. And the other, that the money for citizenship prep, we don't have another source for that. So that really is something we're struggling to kind of figure out.
So, Bonnie, lots of questions here, of course, and might not have any answers, but what do you hope to happen next as you all sort of continue to navigate this together?
I mean, it would be great to get some more funding out there somewhere to bring navigators back on. Earlier this year, we're implementing a grant that Liberty Bank had given us where we were able to, it paid for 22 laptops. And what we did is people came in with a commitment to come to a class for 6 weeks. The first hour was financial literacy. The second hour was digital literacy. And at the end of the 6 weeks, they received their laptop to keep. Now, a program's done, so we don't need a million people to call in about that program right now. But that was a way we took some funding that we had gotten on a smaller scale and ran with it. So we'd love to have more funding, and there are organizations that potentially could do that. We are good stewards when we receive funding. So again, we do have the Everyday Tech happening. We do have the classes happening on twice monthly at the downtown library. So we want people to take advantage of those opportunities, and we will look for other ways to connect them. The ALA has digitallearn.org online. It has online tutorials for free for people, just putting that plug out there. Mm-hmm. But again, when we were doing the classes with people, even getting to the point where accessing that website, knowing how to log into the link to take the training. I mean, we had some people who we took through tutorials of how to use the mouse well. Mm-hmm. So people need those basic skills even to be able to access online tutorials. So we will keep striving.
You've been listening to Bonnie Stolberg, who's the Director of Public Services at Hartford Public Library. Bonnie, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
You're also listening to Bridget Quinn, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer for Hartford Public Library. Bridget, appreciate your time as well.
Thank you, Catherine.
After the break, we move from libraries to public schools when it comes to digital literacy. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. What does digital literacy look like in schools today? Does every student come in to school knowing how to use a Chromebook or a tablet? And if they don't have those skills, do they fall behind? We're digging into digital literacy this hour, and joining me now is Dr. Elena Forzani. Dr. Forzani is the Director of the Literacy Education and Reading Education Programs and Assistant Professor at Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Elena, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, great to be here.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Elena, you've been following the conversation talking about digital literacy as it pertains to adults mostly, but can you talk about whether or not digital literacy is an important skill in K through 12 schools nowadays, too?
Yeah, sure. Well, yes, it's a very important skill. And I think, there are a couple ways, there are many ways we can think about digital literacies, but there are a couple of important ways. I think a lot of the conversation this morning has focused on sort of more like what I might think of as technology skills. So doing things like being able to log on or use a mouse or check our healthcare platform or do some online banking. And our skills are all incredibly important. In addition to those kinds of skills, there are also skills that are related to sort of more traditional ways we might think about reading and writing. Mm-hmm. And in a digital sense, we think a lot about the reading and writing skills that kids need to be able to read and write in online contexts. So that's everything from How do I type a keyword in when I'm doing a small, when I want to answer a question that I have? How do I type in keywords? How do I figure out which search results to click on? How do I evaluate the credibility of information? And it's also making sense of information that we might find on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, and sort of understanding those different platforms and how algorithms work, how algorithms filter information. So really skills related to reading and writing in online contexts, which aren't just alphabetic print skills, but also being able to interpret image and video and sound.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up the sort of like the differentiation, because we've been talking more about getting to the point of having those skills to know what to input or use a mouse or to fill out information. But we want to go back to the idea of an early education on this, because you do have to go through that to know how to do the next step, right? And as you were mentioning just now, and with your experience too, also with that in mind, do kids come to school with the same general understanding of digital skills, or is this something that schools assess and then respond to accordingly?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think that kids come to school with such a wide variety of digital skills, and that's true, starting in preschool or starting in kindergarten when kids are generally required to come to school. And it's even true, down the line in middle school and high school. We see huge digital divides in terms of skill, and children have a wide variety of home experiences before they enter kindergarten. So some kids are really familiar with digital technologies, and some, have fewer opportunities, as you guys discussed before. There's a wide variety of the kinds of devices that kids have at home, but then also the kinds of things that kids are doing on those devices. So many kids may be just doing passive digital activities like watching TV shows, things like this, versus engaging in educational apps that might require them to be a little more interactive with what they're doing, or reading books through Libby. We talk to librarians reading ebooks through Libby or through platforms like Epic that offer ebooks and that require a little more cognitive focus for kids compared to just passive activities like watching TV. So there's a big divide in that as well. And just like kids come to school with different alphabetic print literacy skills at kindergarten, now we have this whole extra set of skills that kids need. And so there's certainly such a variety of skills that kids come to school with. And you also asked a great question in there about how do we assess are we good at assessing those kinds of digital literacy skills? And the answer is no, we are not. Mostly, schools are so focused on alphabetic print literacy and helping kids just learn how to read, learn the sounds for each letter, learn their phonics. And learn how to comprehend print text, that it is just a lot of instructional time that's required for kids to learn all the different skills that they need. And it's always a puzzle for schools, I think, to figure this out. And the pandemic, of course, just created larger divides that schools are sort of still trying to address and to keep up with.
Well, and it's interesting in this context because we're talking about the importance of learning these skills, but we're also at the same time hearing a lot of push to get students off of devices. But I feel like the context is very different here. But can you talk about sort of the implementation of more technology in classrooms? Has it opened doors that didn't exist? What are some of the benefits of technology when it comes to learning gains? Because we have talked about technology is really here to stay.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. Technology is certainly here to stay. And there is definitely this push, right, to get kids off screens, which is important. And as the parent of two kids, 8 and 11, it's such a push and pull, right? And again, I think it comes back to what are kids actually doing on those devices. There's a big difference between watching something or, engaging in social media, which can have harmful mental health effects, versus reading a book or doing some kind of educational activity. So I think that's always an issue that schools face that also comes up at home as well, that kids need to deal with.
Well, and is it important to have these conversations at home or having that digital literacy education in the classroom to help students being able to differentiate between the passive and the active earlier in life versus later?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of sort of like teaching kids skills early on and helping to teach them, not just the digital skills, but then the executive functioning skills that go with handling those digital devices so that it's not just parents or teachers saying, okay, now it's time to get off your device, but helping kids learn skills to sort of manage their own time. Which is really challenging to do, right? It's challenging for us as adults.
Right.
And so I think on the one hand, we can't expect kids to be able to do that. And on the other hand, we should give them some scaffolding, some tools to help support their ability to sort of self-regulate a little bit their time. I see a lot of parents do that and also skills. So teaching those self-regulation skills alongside the digital literacy skills is a really important thing that I think is a responsibility of both families and schools.
Well, and as we've talked about, you mentioned time management just now as something to look into, and also students learning how to sort of discern between reliable sources and inaccurate information on the internet. Has the invention of ChatGPT complicated this process? Does this add to that, and is there a need to really be able to differentiate between that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things with digital technologies is we constantly see the technologies change, right? And so with each new technology, there are new digital literacy skills that kids need to learn, that parents need to teach, that schools need to teach, and that sort of complicates everything. And it just like increases the number of skills that we have to teach during the same amount of instructional time as well. But yeah, so ChatGPT, of course, it's another set of skills and it's really complex. It's hard enough already for anybody to evaluate how credible information is or how accurate it is. And when you throw ChatGPT into the mix, I think it becomes all the harder to be able to discern what's credible and what's not, because you have a whole new sort of like author that you're trying to figure out. It's almost like a super author, right? That's taking text from everywhere on the internet and putting it together. And that can be really, really useful. I know many of us, of course, we've already started using those sort of like Google AI summaries and using AI for lots of different things. And that can be incredibly helpful. And at the same time, we have to be even more vigilant about where is AI getting that information from? How credible is the underlying information that AI is pulling from? What are sort of the algorithms that are running those AI programs, and what are the different aspects of the different AI programs that we need to be thinking about as we're evaluating that information? And then even as writers, how are we teaching kids to sort of write prompts that might be more responsible, more ethical, more credible, or that might produce information that's more ethical?
Got about 30 seconds here, but I want to ask, are you seeing movement in the earlier educational space pushing to include this education as part of the classroom experience?
Yeah, I think it's slow, but we're definitely seeing some movement. There is definitely a cohort too that is sort of very anti-screen and anti-digital literacy at a young age, and there's good reason to be cautious. But again, if we don't teach those skills early on, the divides are going to get worse. And so if the digital technologies are here to stay, as you said, we need to make sure we prioritize teaching kids how to use them well.
You've been listening to Dr. Elena Forzani, who's an assistant professor in BU's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Elena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Koi Win. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.